Jamie just looks so happy.
Don't I though?
Yeah.
24 hours. There we go.
Yeah. I got a little note on my calendar to check the county's website a little bit after 8.
That's right. Absolutely.
Sending you love, Jamie. Sending you love.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Was exciting. I was in Beaverton on Saturday at Jan's bookstore, and I won a ton of stuff, which I'm very excited about. So
the universe owes you, friend.
There we go, right? The universe, there we go.
She taketh and giveth, Jamie. This week you got something, but also just reminder, Beaverton's the best ever. And every time people come, they get presents. So,
That's great. Well, Mr. Chair, it looks like we do have a quorum now. If you want to go ahead and convene, we can do that.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the February 12th Washington County Coordinating Committee meeting. We'll go ahead and start off with public comment. Do we have anybody looking to chat with the committee, Stephen?
We didn't have anyone who signed up ahead of time. And it looks like all of our, I do have one community member. Is there anyone in the community that would like a chance to address the committee before we get started? You can use the raise hand feature. Okay, I'm not seeing anyone.
All right, that'll move us to item number 2, introductions and roll call. I want to welcome everyone again. I understand that Glenn Boland will be here today representing ODOT. With that, we'll go ahead and go through the roll. Go ahead, Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. City of Banks, Mayor Jones.
I am here.
Thank you.
Sorry, I was double muted.
No worries. Welcome. Thank you. City of Forest Grove, Mayor Wenzel. I'll keep an eye out for her. City of Hillsborough, Mayor Calloway.
Present.
Thank you. City of King City, Mayor Fender.
Here.
Thank you. City of North Plains, Mayor Linehan.
Here.
Thank you. City of Sherwood, Mayor Rosner.
Present.
Thank you. City of Tigard, Mayor Lube.
Here.
Thank you. City of Tualatin, Mayor Bubenik.
Here.
Thank you. And City of Wilsonville, Councilor Dunwell. We'll keep an eye out for her as well. And for Washington County Commissioner 5. Keep an eye out for her as well. Okay, so with that, we do have a quorum. Let's go through our non-voting members. I saw Councilor Rosenthal from Metro has joined us.
Yes.
And as you mentioned, Glenn Boland is joining us for ODOT today. Thank you, Glenn.
Hi there.
And
great to be here.
Thank you. We don't have a port representative. And for TriMet, I see John Sarah. Thanks for joining us, John.
Thank you.
Okay, that's it.
Terrific. Brings us item number 3, our action item for today. Consideration of the Washington County Coordinating Committee meeting minutes of December 11th. They won't have a chance to review, and anybody knows anything needed to be changed. If not, I'll accept a motion to adopt.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to adopt the meeting summary for December 11th, 2023. All those in favor say aye or raise your hands.
Aye.
Aye.
Abstentions? Not seeing any nays. Looks like it's unanimous. All right. That brings us to item 4A, climate pollution reduction grants. We have Eliot Rose from Metro, who's going to provide us an overview of Metro's EPA-funded climate pollution reduction grant and what the next steps are. Metro is currently working on a preliminary climate action plan, and staff from Washington County and other cities have been working closely with Metro through this process. Welcome, Eliot.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Pardon me while I just pull up my screen to share and make sure that my sound is working and everything. All right. Can folks see my screen okay? Maybe just give me a thumbs up and you'll be done. Thank you. All right, so thank you so much for that introduction. I'm Eliot Rose. I'm a senior transportation planner at Metro, and I'm also the project manager of these climate pollution reduction grants, which I'm going to refer to as CPRG. And I'm just here to give you an overview of this grant. This is a really exciting but also complicated grant that has some short-term and long-term elements that I'll be discussing with you today. So,
Eliot,
yeah.
you know, we can see, you know, basically your notes and the current slide and the next slide. So we're seeing.
Oh my goodness. Let me just try that one more time here.
Want us to see.
Thank you so much, Mayor Calloway. I must have been sharing the wrong screen.
I'm going to get nasty texts from all the rest of the panelists, but just, I just thought that.
No, how's that? Does that look a little better?
Yep.
Okay, thank you so much for letting me know. So really why I wanted to come talk with Washington County and many other counties around the region about this grant right now is that Metro's administering this grant that makes our agency partners eligible to pursue some implementation grants to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the near term. And also the grant that we have funds us to create a comprehensive regional climate action plan in the long term. And so as far as how members of WCCC can get involved, you know, you can support the county and its cities in pursuing implementation grants for some of the projects that we hear about today. That I'm going to share about that we've identified so far as priorities. And you can also give us feedback to ensure that the comprehensive plan that we're moving into in the next stage addresses all the climate needs and opportunities across the region, including those here in Washington. So these CPRG grants consist of both planning grants and implementation grants, and Metro has a planning grant. These are non-competitive 4-year grants that fund states and metropolitan areas to identify projects and create plans that significantly reduce greenhouse gases and can be implemented and are ready for implementation, both by the agencies that would potentially lead these projects, as well as, you know, they're aligned with state and federal climate funding that could help to move these projects forward. Two things that are really interesting about this grant right off the bat are that, first, it covers the entire metropolitan statistical area, not just the 3-county metro region, but the entire entire metro area, or MSA, which includes Clark and Skamania County on north of the Columbia, as well as Yamhill County and Columbia County here on the Oregon side. So it's requiring us to cover a bigger planning geography than we normally do. Another thing that's really interesting about this grant is that it's not just limited to transportation and land use related emissions, but it's really looking for ideas to reduce all emissions. The emissions produced in buildings, the emissions produced due to agriculture, the emissions produced in industrial processes. So it's bigger in both geography and in scope than a lot of the projects that I, as a transportation planner, tend to discuss with our local partners in rooms like this. In order to deal with that breadth, we set up a new group, the Climate Partners Forum, to help steer this project. And as I talk about these folks, I'm just going to leave the list of agencies up on the screen because I want folks to be able to see how their agencies have been represented. If you see your agency on this list and you want to know who to connect with to talk, who's staffing the grant at your agency, or if you don't see your agency on this list and you want to be included in the future, I'll have my email address at the end of the presentation. You can reach out to me. This is an open invite group of technical staff who provide feedback at key points of this process, including on all the draft plans and the processes we established to create those draft plans in order to make sure that all the deliverables we're producing are really addressing the needs across all these different greenhouse gas reduction sectors and across the metro statistical area. So this is the process and timeline for this grant is pretty complicated and pretty unusual. The main thing I want you all to know is that, you know, this grant involves 2 rounds of planning and each has a round of implementation funding attached to it. So The planning deliverables are shown in the arrows going up the center of the slide. The implementation funding rounds are shown in green bubbles. And we're in this left-hand arrow right now. We're creating the Priority Climate Action Plan, which is a very short-term implementation-focused plan that we had 6 months to create. And the purpose of this plan was really to identify the projects and existing plans in the region that were well positioned for the implementation grants that are tied to these priority climate action plans. You can see from that first green bubble that EPA is making a round of CPRG implementation grants due on April. The applications are due April 1st, a month after this priority climate action plan that we're working on now is due. It's due on March 1st. Any project that's identified in one of these initial plans can apply. And EPA is providing $4.3 billion in implementation funds that could potentially implement those projects across the entire US in competitive grants. So the purpose of this first deliverable is the first plan we're creating has a real short timeline, and it's really laser focused on looking at what we're already doing and elevating the stuff that's good candidates for one particular funding stream that EPA is making available. Then after we get done with that round of activity, we go back to create the comprehensive climate action plan, which is in this middle area in dark blue. That's calling on us to broaden the scope and think about all greenhouse gas emissions in the region, not just the ones that are well captured in our current plans, and come up with a plan to reduce them. It's a really great opportunity because we don't have that type of comprehensive regional climate action plan for the region right now. EPA has told us that they plan to make or condition other federal funding sources so that the projects that are included in these comprehensive climate action plans are prioritized, but they haven't shared any details about that, which is why that second green ball showing the other federal climate funds that might come at the end of the comprehensive climate action plan to implement those projects, that's a little fuzzy because I don't have much information about what that looks like yet. Finally, after we complete this comprehensive climate action plan in summer 2025, we have 2 years of status reporting where we're just updating EPA on the status of the actions including in these plans and on any implementation actions that have moved forward out of these plans. So I think the big thing that's really been interesting to grasp about this is normally we think about the visions and the policies and the data and the needs first, and then we get down to some specific projects. This process has really required us to reverse that and start with the projects that are ready to move ahead and then go back and do the bigger picture plan. So another thing that adds to the complexity of this project is that Metro's not the only agency with one of these planning grants that affects our region. So the state of Oregon, so this map is showing all the different CPRG planning grantees across the country. All states that have received a grant are shown in yellow. All metro areas that have received a grant are shown with a red dot. And what you'll notice is that both the states of Oregon and Washington have also one of the same grants that we've received. And what that means is that projects in our region can move forward for implementation funding, not only based on the plan that Metro creates, but also based on the plans that, depending on which side of the river they're on, either Oregon or Washington create. And so we're coordinating actively with the states to make sure that we support and don't duplicate each other with this process so that we position agencies to bring home as much money as possible off of these implementation grants. Okay, so I've just mentioned a really confusing list of different plans and funding opportunities that are at play with this grant. So I'm going to walk through some slides to try to show how they all overlap. We began this process. Before we began this process, there were already a lot of climate action plans in the region. Washington County had its own plan. Communities like Beaverton within Washington County had its plan. Metro had transportation emissions reduction plans. So even before we started this grant, we had kind of a big landscape of climate action plans that were both at the local and regional, and at the state level. This first plan that we've been working on, the Priority Climate Action Plan, or PCAP, starts with that existing universe of plans and focuses on the strategies that are identified in those plans that are particularly well aligned with the CPRG implementation grants and other near-term funding opportunities. So those plans are going to focus on a subset of what's in, the broader set of climate action plans in the region. They're really aligned with these implementation grants. And then once these plans are done on March 1st, Metro or other agency partners in the region can apply for CPRG implementation grants to implement an action that's either in the regional plan or in one of the state plans. So that's in orange because that's the next milestone for the grant. And then the other next milestone for the grant that I'm discussing with you today is these longer term plans, the comprehensive climate action plans, which are the next deliverable under our grant. And those are an opportunity finally to identify all the other projects that stand to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in our area, whether they were captured already in the plans that we did or whether they're new ideas, and think about how we might line those up for implementation. So it's been a quick process and we've learned a lot. Here's some of the things I want to highlight. This process is really about looking at projects that are implementation ready and effective at reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And in particular, that implementation readiness has been an important frame in terms of narrowing down what we want to focus on here, because there are a lot of great ideas in the region about how to reduce emissions, and some of them are further along than others, and this has been a chance to elevate those. At the same time, as we review all the plans that we're drawing from to create this one, the local climate action plans really vary widely, and that's a barrier to taking the type of collective action that EPA is asking for. The most significant greenhouse gas reduction opportunities are in transportation, residential energy efficiency, and waste management. These are areas where the region already does a lot of coordination and where existing climate action plans highlight that local governments are already doing things that can be scaled up with an implementation grant and that work to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Finally, no surprise here, but there isn't enough, even though this is a really significant opportunity with these upcoming CPRG implementation grants, there isn't enough funding in that or in other pots to support all the climate needs and opportunities we have in the region, especially because individual agencies have to apply to lead grants, and applying for a federal grant takes a lot of work, and our agency partners have limited capacity to apply. So in our priority climate action plan, these are the strategies that we're focusing on. I'm not going to walk through these in a lot of detail. I'll say that they contain a lot of transportation-related actions, not because transportation is necessarily more important than the other issues, but because that's an area where we already have a lot of coordination through tables like WCCC or like JPACT and TPAC at Metro. And so we're able to identify transportation actions in a lot of detail. Rather than focusing on this list, which is what's eligible to apply for grant, I'd rather give you an update on what's actually underway and applying for these implementation grants. So on February 1st, notices of intent to apply were due for implementation grants, for CPRG implementation grants. And here's a list of projects that submitted a notice of intent to apply. It includes a TriMet project to electrify buses, TriMet Metro project to redesign signalization on certain high capacity transit corridors and keep buses moving through traffic more quickly. A notice of intent Gresham approved to add composting capacity, a Metro application to fund energy efficiency and the affordable housing units that we build through our transit-oriented development program. And though it's not shown on this slide because there wasn't a notice of intent to apply submitted, I do know that staff in Washington County have been leading an effort in coordination with other counties to explore an application that provides energy efficiency retrofits in publicly managed affordable housing units. So what's next for this process? We're working to finalize this priority climate action plan, support and coordinate with our partners in developing these implementation grant applications that are due on April 1st. And then once we get those implementation grant applications in, we're going to pivot to developing this comprehensive climate action plan, which and thinking about what additional climate strategies we want to focus on in that plan that we didn't, that weren't highlighted in this first plan that we're creating. So here are the questions I'm interested in discussing with you today. Want to make sure everybody knows about this process and absolutely want to answer any questions folks have about the approach. And also really curious for your input on the comprehensive climate action plan and what things we should focus on that are going to really be important to supporting y'all in Washington County in meeting your goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions as we prepare to scope out the next round of this grant. So I'll drop us out of sharing and paste these questions as well as my email address in the chat.
All right. Questions for Eliot? Mayor Callaway. You're muted.
Okay, you may regret that you told me that.
That's probably true.
My question, going back to, and in our packet, I didn't have a copy of, the financial request. I just had the priority strategies, and I guess I'm confused as to why expanding the use of parking pricing, seems to rate higher in the score than electrifying transit fleets, because it seems to me that electrifying TriMet buses and SMART down in Wilsonville and wherever else, really would have a much bigger impact than expanding the use of parking pricing around Washington County. And I had another question, support weatherization and efficiency upgrade in existing and in new affordable housing. Well, shouldn't new affordable housing already have those efficiency upgrades in them so that we're not having to come back afterwards and doing those upgrades in new affordable housing? That to me just seems like, low-hanging fruit. So I'm just really mystified by, the scores, who judged and what the criteria was for the scores, who scored it and everything else. In some ways, it feels like more of a priority for spending than it does a priority for reducing greenhouse gases.
Wow. So great questions, Mayor Callaway. I really appreciate this. So those screening criteria that are reflected in that final memo, I'm happy to follow up with more information about those. Those were developed by our consulting team and shared out with this Climate Partners Forum over the course of 2 successive meetings. They were designed to reflect the criteria that EPA is putting in its in the implementation grant applications. We wanted to align with the implementation grant criteria so that we could be telegraphing which projects were likely to be competitive when EPA opened up these implementation grants. And, it's definitely more art than science in some cases, because the implementation grant notice of funding opportunity and the evaluation criteria are not 100% clear. They didn't tell us exactly how to quantify this stuff. We had to make our best guesses with respect to what EPA was looking for. But one of the reasons why I think, and I don't have the members of the consulting team on to support me and get into all the details of that today, but one of the things I do know is that cost effectiveness of greenhouse gas reductions is a criterion for EPA. And that may be one reason why parking pricing shows up competitively, because generally, parking pricing involves some small startup costs, but you can recoup those costs. So, it may be that it was scoring higher. And I think there's only a difference of a point or two there. Not necessarily because it reduced more greenhouse gases, but because it did so at a significantly lower cost. And as far as new housing, that's actually a really great question. New housing is currently not required to be as energy efficient as it could be. And the reason that I've heard for that is because we have expensive land in our region and we have a housing crisis, and it's really important to get more units out there to make sure that housing's affordable, especially affordable units. And there's a concern that if we place unfunded requirements on new affordable housing to also really get to the best energy efficiency standards, then it would ultimately result in less units being built and less being done to address the housing crisis in the region. And so getting funding from EPA so that we don't have to put those costs of making a new development on developers allows us to get around those trade-offs and ensure that new units are more energy efficient without creating a risk that fewer of those units will be produced.
Thank you. I appreciate the explanations, the answers. That was really helpful.
Other questions?
I think we've got Councilor Rosenthal with his hand up.
Councilor Rosenthal.
Thank you, Chair Bubenik. Just two questions. First of all, on that first list of the stakeholders, or I should say the committee, maybe I missed it, but I would think WashDOT would be somewhat involved since transportation is one of the big things. I don't remember seeing it. Maybe I missed it. And then my other question is a little larger. In your second list that you presented of potential projects, you talked about expanding the opportunities for producing green energy. But my understanding is that we have some power grid limitations on doing that extensively. And I remember recently a visit to the PGE headquarters, and one of the things that could be done would be expand their, storage battery capacity so we can utilize more clean energy sources. Is that something that's being considered, or is that something that, could be applied as a grant? I'm just wondering where that stands. Do we need power grid modifications?
Okay, great. Thank you for these great questions. So first of all, WashDOT is definitely on the list of partners that we invite to the forum. And in addition, they sent staff to one of the forum meetings, but also I coordinate with my grant counterparts at WashDOT and DEQ behind the scenes regularly as well to make sure we're not stepping on each other's toes. And that actually kind of gets to why energy generation wasn't included in the short-term strategy we're just about to wrap up. And, the type of feedback that actually we're really looking for to see if and how we would address this over the long term, because this first plan was really focused on things that it makes sense for our region to implement in 5 years. Mm-hmm. And I think some of the uncertainty that you're describing, Councilor Rosenthal, not just in terms like the grid's capacity, but also the state just changed its regulations to require utilities to bring a lot more clean energy into their supply between now and 2035. And so I think there were a lot of questions that we grappled with as where it seems like there is something our region could be doing to increase renewable energy generation. And it felt like we need a little bit more thinking to think about exactly what that will be. Because if the state is going to require utilities to get cleaner, and if utilities are still talking back and forth with the state about whether or not we have the capacity to do that, we kind of need to see how that conversation plays out a little bit to know where we can best make a difference as locals. And so, that's really great feedback, because you're giving me something to kind of watch out for that helps us figure out how to move forward with this area in the next round of planning.
Well, just a comment I had from PG&E was when it came to, long-term battery storage for alternative energy sources, that they were not the technology leader. They would apply and adapt and implement things as the situation improved or as, incentives improved. So that seems like a direction we're going to be going at some point, but I understand the state has to be involved.
Other questions? Not seeing anyone else's hands up, so thank you very much, Eliot, for coming today and letting us know what's going on with this grant process, and looking forward to working with you on implementing this eventually throughout the Washington County area and individual cities.
Thanks for everyone's time today.
All right. That brings us to 4B, which is the Transportation Development Tax Rate Update. This will be led by Dyami. Is Dyami here? There he is. The TDT ordinance requires an annual rate adjustment. This is a non-discretionary action, but still must be approved by the Washington County Board of Commissioners. This year, the TDT rate will increase by, is it up by or to 8.29%? So Dyami, you're on.
So, sorry, Chair, if I could really quickly, just a couple of little administrative things. I wanted to note Commissioner Fye and Mayor Wenzel had joined during the last agenda item, so make sure you knew they were there. As well as we're running a little bit ahead of schedule actually today, and so we may need to juggle the order just a little bit. So after the TDT item, I may suggest that we jump to the JPACT agenda and impact agenda next.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome, Dyami.
All right, thanks, Chair. Yes, so per the TDT ordinance, Washington County staff and the Board of County Commissioners are required to take action on the TDT rate adjustment on an annual basis, as you described. And that rate does go into effect July 1st. And to answer your question in terms of the rate adjustment, it is 8.29% is the increase over the prior year. And that rate adjustment is based on a 5-year rolling indexed average, weighted based on construction costs, labor, and right-of-way costs. And so we have calculated that. The rate table is in your packet. So happy to answer any questions. This is again, just non-discretionary, so it's more informational for WCCC members, and our board will act on it in May in advance of the rate going into effect in July.
Questions for Dyami? Pretty quiet.
Chair, I might just make a note. This is a recurring item that happens every year, and as Dyami pointed out, it's really non-discretionary in the TDT code, but it does require a board action. And so one of the challenges that we consistently have had with TDT is that the index really isn't truly keeping up with cost increases, and so it's always a bit of a lagging indicator. But we are pleased to see that there's a fairly significant increase this year. I mean, and again, trade-offs, adding to the cost of housing and other development, but this is also important to help us try to at least do our best to keep pace with cost increases for transportation improvements.
Yep. Any questions? All right, well.
See, oh, Mayor Callaway's hand is up.
Oh, there
Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Chair. So I guess, I guess part of, cities are getting hammered, by the state, by the home builders that, we're the ones that are, infringing or throwing up obstacles and roadblocks to building houses. And so, as this goes forward, I just hope that that this is communicated to legislators as to why, because otherwise cities, I don't know, maybe I'm on the wambulance this morning, but it just sort of feels like cities sometimes become the messengers of this, and we're going to be doing the same things as cities. We have to adjust it also, but if we can all speak kind of with one voice, or at least one perspective, I think that consistency and will help with the delivering of the message.
Agreed. Anything else on this subject? All right, thanks, Dyami. So as Stephen recommended, we'll go ahead and jump over to 4E, the JPAC agenda, and that'll be led by Mary Calloway.
Commissioner Fye, would you, do you want to jump in on that one? Otherwise, let me find that.
Mayor Calloway, yes, I'm here. Thanks, Stephen for bumping me. I'm not able for the JPAC trip. I'm not able to attend this JPAC trip. I've communicated to Councilor Gonzalez, or Chair Gonzalez, I should say, as a JPAC chair, because we have a, besides Tuesday being a board meeting, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, we do have all day long budget meetings with the public that's been scheduled, so that cannot be moved. I've communicated that Metro, and there was I think there was sort of a mistake that happened on that end, but we've communicated, and it's unfortunate that it's happening in May, and I won't be able to attend that meeting.
Okay, Commissioner Fye, we skipped 4E, the JPAC agenda.
Oh, sorry.
We're gonna circle back, but now we know where you're gonna be during that time. But yeah, Mayor Calloway and you are discussing 4E, the JPAC agenda.
Oh, I see. Go ahead, Mayor Calloway. I'm in my own world, I feel like, today. Sorry, Mayor Calloway. But now you know that I won't be attending the JPAC meeting.
Yep.
Trip.
You're muted, Steve. He's still talking away. Steve, you're muted.
I thought I had unmuted myself. Sorry, I don't have it open in front of me. Let me go to the link, and then I'll be glad to probably cut and paste it and just drop it into the chat, if that's okay.
All right.
Unless Councilor Rosenthal.
I was gonna say, if it's helpful, I've got the
Rosenthal
agenda
has it ready
open
to
and can
go.
run through the list of topics, if at least that's helpful.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, and we've got our briefing, actually, Mayor Calloway and I have our briefing this evening, so we were a little behind the ball today, sorry.
No worries. So the action items or the agenda items include a resolution for the purpose of adding or amending 7 projects to the 24-27 MTIP to meet transportation project delivery requirements. A information and discussion item on 27 to 30 MTIP program direction and work program. And then an update on 2023 RTP implementation and MTIP amendment and adoption process for toll projects in the region. That's all.
Any questions for Mayor Calloway on this, or Councilor Rosenthal?
I can't really respond. I'm not, I don't sit on JPAC, so I'll stay out of this one.
All right.
So I'm assuming Steve's voting against anything that has toll in the name, right?
Hopefully.
Except for Toll House cookies.
That's clear enough for me.
All right. So let's go over to 4F, the MPAC agenda. Mayor Rosner.
Thanks. So a couple things. As per normal, the official agenda is not out yet for the February 28th meeting, but if you reference the work plan, assuming that's what ends up on the agenda, there's 3 items. I want to point out a couple. They're going to give an update on the garbage and recycling system facility plan update. That's one to pay close attention to. For those of you that have already seen that update or seen a version of that update, that gets into what they're looking at through the entire metro region in terms of future facilities and where services are located and how they're delivered. For those of us that were at the MMC meeting, I think it was, Frank, was it the MMC or the GPI that we got that update? I can't remember which meeting it was, but one of the two, they gave us an update on it. So I think that's something we all need to be paying close attention to and where they're headed with that particular plan. There's going to be a housing update, and then they're also going to do an overview to the approach of the estimated housing needs. There's been a lot of conversation on impact around that particular item, and also at the urban growth report roundtable that myself and some others sit on, in terms of how they're actually looking at doing those estimates on housing needs, because it's very formula driven. They are rounding up, they're basically kind of rounding up all of our zoning types and then creating an economic model to tell them what kind of housing production we can expect to see in those zoning types, with that overlay of what the existing footprints of housing in the area is. Same kind of model with the jobs plan that they're looking at. So that's those are all informational, so I can report back later. But I did have a request that when I was appointed by members of this team to be our representative, I don't remember us ever appointing an alternate. And on the 28th, I'm not going to be available. I'm actually flying to Vandenberg Air Force Base to see my niece get promoted to Master Sergeant in the Space Force. So I can't miss that. But I was wondering if any of you would like to go in my stead, unless we picked an alternate. But I don't remember us picking an alternate. Anyone have a passion for this stuff? Would like to attend?
Look at those hands shoot up there, Tim. Look at them.
No, I was gonna say I'd like to attend, but I think we should pick someone else.
I thought Mayor Wenzel wanted to do it.
In my classroom, when you volunteer someone, you volunteer yourself.
Whoa.
So it's like Jeff.
Actually, no, I'm only half joking. I thought when we talked about this before that you were interested in the alternate position. Am I remembering wrong? That's totally
You're
cool.
incorrect. I'm on R1 region.
Oh, okay, it was
that's what I
R1.
did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jessica, your hands up.
Yes, thank you. I just looked at the roster for Impact, and it looks like the alternate to Mayor Rosner is Councilor Kate Moore from King City. So I don't know if she's still, if she knows that, number one, and is prepared to attend Impact as an alternate on the 28th.
I believe she, I think we thought it was, well, I think given the current circumstances in King City, we should pick another alternate from this group, for at least for the next meeting, and then we can leave her as is, depending on tomorrow night.
Hey, Jeff, since they're going to talk about that regional waste management plan, is that something you would be interested in? Because I know Metro has some property out there.
Oh, interested but available. I think, let me check my schedule. I think I would rather go to this than a funeral, but I think, oh, actually the 28th you're talking about, right?
February 28th.
Yeah. Can it be done remote, or is it in person only? Because I'll be in California.
No, there's a remote option if you're available.
Yeah, I mean, I could probably dial in from California.
Okay, I'll let them know that you'll be there.
If everybody's okay with that.
Everyone else,
look, Melinda, you got your wish.
Everyone else, step backwards the military way, and then you were standing alone.
Standing there, and Tim bushwhacked me after my own comment.
I had to get someone, but feel free to give me a ring if you want to chat before that meeting.
Cool, thank you.
Awesome, thank you, appreciate it. And with that, that's all I have for Impact.
All right. So, Stephen, do we want to go to item 5, or are you guys prepared to go back to the JPACT?
Yeah, we're stalling for a time a little bit here. We'd really like to have Erin Doyle for the JPACT trip discussion, as well as obviously the legislative update. We think she'll be joining us around 1 o'clock. So I think we could jump to the other updates. And I know in particular, we had John Sarah from TriMet, I think was going to give us a little bit of an update on Forward Together 2.0.
Great. Welcome, John.
That's right. Thank you, Chair. And sorry about this. We had hoped to have our service planning team, one of the members of the service planning team, join today to give you an update on our Forward Together 2.0 plan, but we had a scheduling mix-up. So if we've got questions, please just let me know what they are, and I'm happy to follow up with this group for some more specifics. But what I'm here to do today is just that we wanted our partners at WCCC to be aware that we're continuing the work that we started under Forward Together 1.0 with our 2.0 project. So the goal of this project is to understand what it would take to meet the goals that are outlined in the recently adopted RTP. Currently, the modeling that we have there indicates that by 2045, we'd be carrying 5.4% of all trips, where the RTP calls for transit carrying 12% of trips by 2045. So as part of this, we're asking ourselves what it would take to meet that goal of 12% of trips, as well as our own internal goal of 120 million rides a year by the year 2030. So we're starting to engage with staff at your cities, with your cities, and at all of our local jurisdictions to understand what the needs of the communities are that weren't part of Forward Together 1.0. And we'll be doing some analysis and engagement throughout the year and hope to conclude that work by this end of the calendar year. So we hope to, at that time, present a long-range vision for transit service in our region that would, we're hoping to come up with a long-term version of service for our region should additional funding be identified for transit service. So it's basically taking input for what was missing as part of Forward Together 1.0 and coming up with an unconstrained funding vision for what we would like service to look like in the region. And Mayor Rothner, do you have a question?
Oh, I can wait till you're done. I was just getting in line.
Oh, that was pretty much the end of my short update that I got from our service planning team. So shoot.
Well, I was just going to answer your question from at least large portions of Washington County point of view about what we can be doing. And I think you've heard me get on my soapbox about this before, but it's really about getting residents to their jobs and back, and moving them between the housing areas and the work centers. And, for my community, 2 hours on a bus or 35 minutes in a car is an easy choice. We even though we have TriMet service out here, it just does not serve the community. And I'm sure there's some others in the room that would probably echo that same sentiment. So
yeah,
echo.
We've certainly heard that from many of you in this room. I've certainly passed that along to our service planning team many times, and that's going to be something that we're going to continue to grapple with as part of this process, how we can achieve that vision for you all.
Yeah, and I appreciate you giving me a chance to get on my soapbox about it again. So thank you.
Anytime.
Dyami, you have your hand up.
I do. Yeah, I just wanted to offer, in terms of soapboxes, a note that the Washington County Transit Study, which is wrapping up, is hopefully reflective of all of Washington County's interests. And we wanted to acknowledge that TriMet they've delayed kind of kicking off this phase 2.0 work until our transit study is wrapping up. So it folds into TriMet's work plan. So we appreciate that. And I think that's an effective approach moving forward.
Thanks, Dyami. And just to add to that, and for you, Mayor Rosner, yeah, we're certainly hoping and will be engaging with all of your city staff when we're doing this planning work. And we deliberately timed the Forward Together 2.0 with consideration for the Washington County study. So thank you, Dyami.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks, John.
Yep.
Jeff.
I did appreciate, and Dyami knows this from presenting to our council earlier this month, that they did show that link, right? Some kind of linkage that goes from, Western County down to South County, other than the existing 2-hour system. And I really did appreciate that the Washington County analysis had that in the plan, right? They didn't have an answer, but they recognized that this is a real issue that our folks, and Tim's, I think, spoke to it too, basically, how do you get out of one job center to another job center? How do you get from your home to a job center? And it's just not there. And I think that's part of, John, did you say like 4 and change percent and trying to get to 12? Did I mishear you on that?
What did I say? I think it was 5.4% is the current projection, and we're trying to get to 12. And then internally, our goal is for our vision 2030 is getting to 120 million rides per year annually on TriMet by the year 2030.
and I think the substance is speaking to what Tim and I have asked about, maybe the others are thinking but not saying, is it's the how. How do we get people to make that transition? And I think I've talked about it many times, others have too, is how do we make it comparable, not punishment, right? A 2-hour commute is punishment. And I think even your own numbers I've seen in multiple reports from TriMet is people just won't ride that long, right? I think you've shown that there's at 25 minutes or 45 minutes, something in that range is kind of like as long as most people will ride. So I don't know how we get past this. It seems we got to get, the customer interest there. And I can't blame them, right? My commute would be an hour from Cornelius to the Intel site. And my walking time would be longer than my actual drive time from my house to Intel. So I understand why people make these decisions. They talk to me about it at public meetings all the time. So, but thanks for working on this.
Absolutely, and thank you for bringing that up, Mayor. And we certainly understand that, and it's going to be part of how we are looking to increase ridership in the future. But obviously, creating those types of connections is a funding issue. So that's part of the conversation about how we do that.
At the risk of just adding a little bit more, getting on my soapbox a little bit more, long term, most of the growth is happening, outside our core urban areas. So the problem is just going to get worse and worse in terms of, the percentage of customers that actually have viable service. So I think it's important.
Yep. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilor Rosenthal, then Mayor Fender.
Thank you, Mayor Bubenich. First of all, I want to second what Mayors Rossner and Delane mentioned about transportation issues on the west side, very much so. But my question is, it was interesting, we had a forum the other day about greenhouse gas reduction and different groups that I listened to. And one of the issues that seemed very prominent among particularly a certain class, one was suburban women and one was suburban men, was the safety issue. A lot of them said they won't take public transit because they're afraid of getting stabbed. And I'm seriously, that was a comment that a number of them made. So I guess my question to John is in what way is that safety issue being addressed in this version 2?
Thank you, Councilor Rosenthal. And I don't know, version 4 together is it's a service planning concept. It's not something that's addressing our safety and security issues, but addressing our safety and security issues is an absolutely enormous topic. I'd be happy to get someone from our team there to come present to this group in the near future if there's interest, hear about all the different work that we're doing. But off the top of my head, I can say that we've more than doubled our budget from, I think, 2023 on the amount that we're spending on safety and security staff. We are working on beefing up our transit police, which we rely on our jurisdictional partners to supply those police officers. We have budget for, I think, 65 of them. Last I heard, we had 12. And again, that is because we are reliant on our jurisdictional partners lending us those police officers, and they don't have anyone to spare. So there's a bunch of issues that are going on with that. I would also say that right now at the Oregon State Legislature, our bill for the short session is one that would make it illegal to do drugs on transit, and it would make it a Class A misdemeanor to do so. The idea there is to warrant a police response when someone is doing drugs on transit, because it is a very unique circumstance. If someone's doing drugs on the train or on the bus, it's not like everyone else can just get off the bus or move. It's not the same as a public sidewalk or something like that. So we do think that there need to be special considerations made for people that are doing this on transit. So that's something we're working on right now. It is absolutely a top priority for transit that we make it safe for all of our riders, all of our customers, and especially the people that rely on transit, because it is their means of transportation. So it's something that we're working on, and I'm happy to work with staff to get a better update for you on all those efforts on safety and security.
Thank you.
Well, great minds, Garrett, because that was also my point, and I think just to add on to it, whether there's an actual threat of safety or not, the reality is the perception is certainly there. I can just anecdotally tell you that my residents have one, no ability to take public transit because it doesn't exist in King City except limited on Highway 99. But then two, all I hear all the time is the fact that it's just not safe and they're not willing to risk it. And so, you know, certainly the perception is there. So anywho, and I wholeheartedly agree with Tim and join you on your soapbox, Tim.
And thank you for bringing that up, because the statistics do show that it's actually improving on transit. Things are getting safer. Everything's actually getting better by the numbers, but that's absolutely not the public perception, and perception is reality. And when we're talking about increasing ridership and getting people back on the system, absolutely perception is reality. So these actions that we're taking, we need to and want to be able to make them as public and get the word out there that we are doing them, so that we can try and change that perception. So any way that I can help you help us with that, I'm happy to do so.
Sure. Wonderful. Thanks.
And I appreciate the difficult spot that TriMet is in. There's always a gap between perception, reality, and perception. And it's something that takes persistence, and I appreciate their efforts.
Thank you, Counselor.
Any other questions for John? All right. So continue with updates. I'm thinking Mayor Lube has some exciting news about Region 1 Act.
Well, I mean, exciting maybe for everybody else. The last meeting that we had the Region 1 Act, we elected a new chair and vice chair. The chair is Commissioner Paul Savas, and then I will be serving as the vice chair for the next 2 years. You can thank Mayor Callaway for that. So the really, you know, we got a couple of updates on the STIP and Great Streets, but I think really what it's come down to is the Region 1 Act really wants to be more active and more authoritative as far as actually giving opinions and being able to work with the OTC. And we're trying to figure out how to do that. We had many discussions. We had extra meetings and many discussions over what the next 2-year work plan would look like, which is just not feasible at all when we meet 6 times a year. So we're trying to figure out, we have a lot on our plates and what that looks like moving forward. So it'll end up being meeting more. But there's a great push for acknowledgement of safety and really upkeeping what we have and fixing what we have to make it safer for our community members versus building new things. So I would say that's the general thing. Mayor Callaway or Mayor Wenzel, do you have anything to add? Okay.
You know, I don't, Mayor, but I do. You know, I would point out that you know, the bylaws for Region 1 Act, you know, we were electing somebody for a 2-year term, and Washington County Commissioner Roy Rogers was only going to be on Region 1 Act for 1 more year. And so rather than have somebody change midterm, and since the bylaws don't state how that's supposed to be filled, and there's no process for the vice chair to move into the chair, you know, it just made sense to take the bylaws literally and elect somebody to full year terms. And so I am, you know, so I was really glad that Mayor Lube was willing to do this, because it meant that we still retained, you know, a position of, well, committee authority, if you will, in Washington County, as opposed to having it be in Clackamas and or Multnomah County. So thank you very much, Mayor Lube, for stepping up in a major way and bring a little bit of diversity to the group as well.
All right. On the 22nd of January, the RTAC meeting was held, and Commissioner Fye and I were there. It was an interesting meeting because there's some really hot topics discussed. The big takeaway for me is that ODOT keeps dancing around the definition of diversion. And after all these meetings we've had over a year or so, there's still not agreement on what diversion is. You know, the cities have a pretty good idea what they consider diversion versus ODOT's version of what diversion is. And it's still not agreed upon. they're going to the legislature with a whole different interpretation of diversion than the cities that'll be impacted by the tolling on 205. So we continue to discuss that. There's also the discussion about net revenues. If there are going to be any net revenues and the distribution of net revenues, ODOT has taken a position that there is no sharing of revenue. They're sticking to that, and they pointed to legislation that has passed that forbids tolling revenue from being distributed or shared with the city and county. We had a major discussion about that. That was led by Councilor Lewis of Metro and John Isaacs, because they had the opportunity to bring our frustrations and our comments to the OTC, which is the first time members of the RTAC even were able to talk to the OTC at their last meeting. Another item that was discussed and part of the room not very happy about was the agreement that OTC has made on only a 50% discount on tolling for folks less than 200% of federal poverty level. Folks said that's ridiculous. It should be 100%, but that's what OTC decided on. They still have not. They're supposedly doing an analysis still of folks less than 400%, but it's probably not looking good for those folks to get any kind of waiver in terms of tolling. And what I'm trying to think, what else was the hot topic? Oh, we looked at our work plan for next year because ODOT will leave RTAC up and running until tolling is implemented. So we continue to have discussions and try to get those nuggets of information out of ODOT that we can get and try to persuade folks about a better way of implementing this other than tolling. We'll see what happens with the short session. I've been pretty active already with talking with the legislators about it, as have several other folks. Commissioner Fye, did I miss anything that you want to cover on the last meeting?
No, Mayor, you did a great job of summarizing. I think the biggest takeaway for me was how the majority of the members were really ready and interested in having these conversations of the net toll revenue allocation piece and what that looked like. And I was also speaking of transit and the discussion when you all were just having just prior to this update, I think one of the biggest appetite for members or people participating in that meeting was how there probably perhaps should be a requirement or some type of expectation for the net revenue to somewhat be prioritized for cost-effective public transit improvements. And I think especially for folks in Clackamas County who really demonstrated their own deficit when it comes to transit, that was a big tipping the hat towards them to say, we hear you, your transit deficits, and perhaps this net revenue discussion and prioritization should perhaps be focused on also cost-effective public transit improvements. So that was, for me, that was a big takeaway, and I'm looking forward to be honest, how the discussion on OTC went. I didn't watch that meeting because Councilor Lewis and John Isaac sort of compiled the notes from everyone, and we're going to take that summary to OTC to sort of say, this is what we've been hearing, this is what folks are saying, and look forward to hearing what they heard at that table from OTC. So, no, Mayor, you did a great job, and is a to be continued topic, I feel like.
Yeah. One thing I neglected to mention that they have they being ODOT has 4 scenarios for tolling the Abernathy. One of them they threw out, which was basically the one that would maximize revenue because of the impact on the community surrounding because of diversion. So kind of sort of they know what diversion is, but won't really stick to one specific definition of diversion. They're looking right now at the one plan that would have Pricing would adjust due to demand and time, but would never exceed, I think, $275 each way. And there will be no tolling overnight. But again, they're still doing an analysis. They will not commit to any one of these scenarios yet. But at least one's thrown out, the one that was the most expensive and the one that would create the most diversion. So at least we won that one. So that's all I've got. Is Erin ready now, Stephen?
I believe she is.
There she is.
Look, on camera and everything. Thanks for joining us, Erin.
Hey, Erin.
Hi, thank you for everyone who delayed on all the delay topics. I appreciate the buffer. So I don't know if you guys were done. I just thought I'd pop on my camera since I heard my name.
You're up.
Well, so JPACT trip first, and then we'll talk legislative session. And I will say that I have not been able to attend a lot of the coordination meetings on the JPACT trip because there's also the state session that's happening. So I'm going to tag Stephen and Jessica to help me in all of that. But as you all have likely heard already, the dates for the trip this year have been moved up into May. So they're May 13th through the 16th. Which is, a really fun budget time for all of us as local jurisdictions, which might make travel a little bit more challenging this year. We are trying to get a sense of how many folks are interested in coming out to the JPACT trip this year so we can set up our Washington County for success, but also talk about how we work our priorities into those conversations that get scheduled as part of the JPACT trip. So obviously the first question is how many folks are interested in joining from your cities to attend that JPACT trip? And you can say, I don't know yet, but some hands have gone up already. So I just trying to get a sense of that. So I don't know if those hands raised are I'm going or I want to say something. So I'm just going to call on each of you to say words.
Since Tim's got his hand up, it'll be Tim, Steve, and then me.
All right, I'll say some words. I guess I was thinking about this, and do you have a sense of what the regional priorities for conversations are going to be? Because I think it only makes sense for me to raise my hand to go if I can help out with that conversation, and I suspect that's not the case, but I'm just trying to understand what the priorities are going to be and what kind of conversations you're looking to have.
Yeah, I think we're still in the process of developing those priorities. So yes, there is this is the there's the staff conversation is obviously happening, but we need the feedback from everyone that we represent at that table. So if there are things that you would like to see prioritized in those conversations, now would be a great time. And I'll remind folks the way we've structured things in the past is there's the JPACT portion where JPACT runs the agenda, runs the regional priorities, and then we work as Washington County to make it additive for the counties. And by that, I mean geographic counties, not jurisdiction counties. Priorities have a secondary day where we go in and we talk to our 4 elected officials out there or their staffs. So we can also set a secondary prioritization in that conversation, so long as it doesn't directly conflict with JPACT's regional priorities, because we like to continue the conversation, but scope it down into the Washington County region. I would say that at this point in time, we're trying to narrow the list a little bit better so that we don't come in with a packet of 25 projects and priorities, because it's really hard for an effective conversation with our elected officials, and that we're asking them to come to it twice. It's the same set of projects. There's that. So, I mean, you can look at what we did last year in the packet and narrow it further. That we're going to try and narrow it down further from there. And I think, to be honest, in the conversations that I have seen and heard and had, I think now is the time, and this is probably what I'd be proposing back up to the group that's setting the JPACT agenda, is now is the time to start talking about the next infrastructure package and creating this cycle of investment, as opposed to once every 25 years, we get massive investment and it pays for like the things that we needed 10 years ago. So that was a lot of words to stall for time a little bit. But if you want to help set that priority list, we can have that conversation and then make the trip additive for the separate Washington County group goes and has our conversation.
Yeah, would love to, at a minimum, would love to be part of those priority conversations as much as our part of the county can influence that.
I'm going to circle before I get to Steve and Jeff. I think it'd be helpful when Stephen and Jessica and I spoke last week, and we already know, Stephen, you said the city of Portland's not sending any electeds, neither is Multnomah County, correct? Because of budget times.
Yeah, that was our understanding as of last week.
And Metro is probably, I assume, Councilor Juan Carlos is going, right?
I believe there are 3 Metro councilors attending.
All right. So just knowing that, the city of Portland is going to have staff, Multnomah County is going to have staff, but no electeds. So back to you, Mayor Callaway.
And Washington County is also going to be staff, no electeds.
No electeds. Okay. Thank you, Erin. Mayor Callaway.
Thank you. So Erin, I will be headed back there. So will Matt Delata. And, I mean, if we're talking, so that was really why I raised my hand. But if we're, if you're taking comments, I'll go back to, Portland area PCAP priority strategies and electrifying transit fleets, was scored 10, right, which was the lowest, and yet it's included in our regional investment priorities for $1 billion. Now, I might argue that I really think it should be much higher than a 10, ought to be probably a 15 or a 16 on that Metro list. But, it seems like there has to be some coordination between, what we're going back with as a JPACT priority, if it doesn't even reflect, the Metro area PCAP priorities. The other thing is, I noticed that one of the regional investment priorities is $550 million for I-205, which would add a missing third lane, seismic upgrades to 9 bridges and whatnot. Well, does that eliminate the need for tolling, right? Because isn't that third lane what's being funded by the tolling? So so maybe there's just some clarification that is necessary, because it looks like we're going back and asking, for I-205 improvements, which then negate the need for tolling. So I'm more than happy to be a part of the priority setting, or just to continue to be the flash grenade, in the priority setting. So there you go.
That priority list is from last year. So it may not be the same. And the 205, I think, becomes this very long and complicated conversation as changes have been made to the circumstances and understandings about what tolling is and isn't going to pay for. So yes, we can have that conversation, appropriate to pull from the current regional conversations that have already taken place and reached some sort of agreement at various tables. So I'm happy to include you. I wrote down your names and Matt's name as willing participants to join us out there. And then I will be sure to direct you in what you're allowed to say and what you're not.
Jeff.
Trying to think about how I want to pose this. I don't want to be the trip we had last year. I felt like we went back to get scolded by our electeds because our list was too big. And Frank's like, I remember getting the spanking from
Earl.
Earl especially, right? But also to what end, right? I think if we don't have a clear understanding of what we're asking specifically, and then the other part of it is the how, right? If they're in we're not funding things, there's no money, except for maybe a couple of congressional asks or congressional directed spends. Let's be very clear about what we're asking and how we're going to fund it. Because going back there last year with that laundry list and them going, there's no money. What are you guys even here asking about? That just feels silly, right? So if there's no money to be had, what are we going to talk to them about? 2, if we're the only county sending electeds, I'm deeply disappointed and questioning the need for the trip. Because the staff, talking to staff, historically I've seen the importance of this is getting all the staff is important, and seeing also the elected's response to particular priorities has been important. But if we're the only county going to send people elected, maybe this is the year to not do the trip. So, and then my third and hopefully final point is, I've always seen the county day is additive, not duplicative. So when we went back, and I thought had good conversations with the electeds, it was about things that weren't exactly transportation specific, right? If we're talking about we need funding for Hag Lake, right? We're getting a twofer then, I feel like, on the trip, right? If we're talking about Hag Lake, if we're talking about other compatible things that aren't against our transportation priorities of JPACT, but they may be other things. And by the way, we just happen to have, 5 or 6 electeds from Washington County all going to nod and say, this is our top 1, 2, 3 priorities outside the I-5, the 205 Rose Quarter, right? The JPAC message. So I think I'm interested and willing to go the 13th through the 16th, but I need to understand the formatting of it better than I did last year, because if it's last year, 2023 2.0, then don't see the need for any of us to go.
Stephen and then Mayor Beatty.
Thank you. Yeah, I think Mayor Delane actually hit most of the points I was planning to. I think, we certainly heard that last year loud and clear that there was just a really long laundry list of projects, and the guidance really was to tighten that message up. Are there 1 or 2, maybe 3 projects that you're interested in as a region? So I just would reinforce that comment.
Mayor Beatty.
You're muted, Lacey.
We can't hear you. Nope. Maybe switch your mic or something.
Would you like to do it as an interpretive dance?
Yes,
I thought that the answer would be there. I got her to talk. I knew if I smarted off, she'd talk.
I think it's hard for me to justify. I go to DC quite a bit, and I have a hard time finding value in this particular trip for the city of Beaverton. I think it's right smack in the middle of our budget season, which is already super intense, a hard time where we ask a lot of our elected officials. So unless there was some gigantic compelling reason, I would likely sit out of a trip like I've done in the past. I've talked to our delegation quite a bit. So that's just my 2 cents. I think it's the wrong time. It's a hard time of year. We don't have a consolidated message, and there's not a lot of value. And I particularly find it challenging to have a bunch of staff and elected officials mixed together. And then I think the few elected officials that are there end up representing the entire region, which is complicated.
Thank you. Mayor Lou.
I would agree with all of the comments that have been stated, and sort of felt like we weren't effective at all last year. And so I won't be going for that reason, and also because of my state of the city is that Monday. So Tigard won't have elected officials. We may have a staff, maybe if we have a big ask, but I would doubt that even staff will go.
Okay. Right now, I mean, tentatively, if we do go, I plan on attending and, obviously representing the coordinating committee. And then Mike McCarthy would be my staff person on my right side. Mayor Fender doesn't know till after tomorrow.
Yes, I was just about to say, Erin, I'll circle back, or rather, King City will circle back with you directly on Wednesday.
Yeah, and I definitely hear and understand that we have to have a coherent thought about why we're going back in order for this to be both a justifiable expense, but also a productive use of our time to really pull down what we're hoping to get from our federal delegation and what our next steps are. we have 3 months to develop that to some degree. And so I hear a desire for the cities of Washington County to be part of that conversation. So I'll work with Jessica and Stephen to figure out the best and most publicly appropriate way in which we can be responsive to this time schedule that's being set up so these trips are organized in a joint effort between Metro and TriMet. So they really run the process, but we influence the process, we make up the process, and we, like you said, if there's no elected officials there, it's a question of value at that point. We have expressed our concerns about the timing. It is not a great time for anyone in local government with budget cycles being what they are. And I know in years past, we've gone later and we've lost out on some things because, it's later in the year, things are already down the road. I've heard from people who have done these trips prior to 2020 that we used to go in like March. We obviously are not doing that this year. So we can think about that for the longer term conversation about how these JPACT trips work in the region and effectively are timed. I think with the addition of earmarks back into the process, maybe that should have influenced some of our choices, but kind of ship has sailed on that. But I'm happy to keep people in the loop about what it is the purpose and goals are. And what those things you think should be on that list is also going to be really helpful, because now is the time when we can influence that to make it a trip of value if you choose to go. But I also hear and understand that the value proposition isn't there for cities right now in Washington County unless we can find a way to be effective. And that's where I want to hear what you would define as effective would be as well. So, and maybe asking you point blank on a Monday afternoon is not the best use of your time, but feel free to email me with your thoughts. And maybe I can work with Jessica and Stephen to figure out how we can have a better coordinated conversation about that. But also, if you email me with your thoughts, it means Jessica and I can have influence on the process of the agenda setting and the priority setting for the region, so that it's reflective of your experiences back at DC last year. Every year is an improvement. We just have a lot of new people trying to recreate a magic that has happened at JPACT trips, where the region walks in with one voice to get big things done. And that's really what we want to see happen moving forward. And then on the Washington County side of it, how do we get the big things within our county done? And we can, if it is the desire of those that are attending to go beyond the conversation around transportation, we can be clear about that and find those 2 or 3 projects that have county-wide significance or benefit the folks who are attending, to represent all of the coordination that happens within Washington County as well. So it was just a lot of words that a lobbyist might say, though. So send me emails and feedback.
Mayor Delane.
Erin, I'm going to redirect one of your points. You don't have 3 months. You've got the next 3 to 4 weeks, and then I will go ahead and not go, because if we don't have a concerted plan that sounds like something, I think that is one of the problems that is indicative of last year's trip. We found out like, oh, look, here's your PowerPoint the day before, 2 days before. We didn't know what the trip was about, so prep was difficult. So I'm unwilling to wait, because I don't want to buy tickets to cancel tickets and hotels and try to figure all that out if we don't know what we're doing by March 15th.
Okay.
Stephen.
Yeah, I was just going to suggest maybe to Erin and Jessica, I think this would be a great topic for us to bring back to you a month from now in our March meeting. So I think to Mayor Delane's point, yeah, that's a good opportunity for us, I think, to maybe do a final sort of checkpoint with this team and just find out who, if any, is interested. And hopefully by that time, we'll definitely have a little bit more clarity in terms of what the potential agenda and priority projects around the region looks like.
Yeah, I'm happy to come back in March and do that. And I would say in the next week or so, if you and or your staff could email me and what you would measure as a successful and purposeful trip, that's really going to help us influence that within the next month. So when we come back in March, you can see that reflected there. So, and I think that will, yes, Mayor Delane, I say 3 months until the trip, but that's because I write all my talking points at the last minute, but that's not effective for you guys. So we'll be mindful of that as we select things and being mindful of how those materials get prepared, because it's a lot of asks of a lot of different jurisdictions and then put together by Metro and TriMet at the end. And so I think we're working really hard as a staff right now to be better prepared than we were last year and get these things prepared faster. And so this is just first blush, first comment to WCCC, you get an estimation of where we are. So that's part of why we're here now, and we can come back in 1 month to have you guys tell us if we've hit what you believe to be the mark, or if it's not worth your time given the timing and timing requirements from you.
Thanks, Erin.
Councilor Rosenthal.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Bubenik. At the risk of sort of looking like I'm trying to blame Metro, I'll have to.
We'll take that. Go ahead.
Yeah,
we're all on that, Garrett. We're all for that.
But it's a criticism that I've had ever since we started the RTP process, and there was really no attempt in the RTP process to come up with any sense of vision. It was a list of independent projects, and because of that, you have no particular long-term goals. Now, if you can come up with something cohesive in the next 3 weeks, and I'm not going to, obviously, I'm not on JPACT, but I have to say that Metro shares some of the blame for not coming up with a sort of trying to foster some sort of regional Washington County visions for what we need to do going forward. So I appreciate the difficulties you're having in figuring out whether to go or not.
Anything else pertaining to the JPACT trip?
So, Chair Bubenik, I was just going to make a note. I was just looking at our WCCC meeting calendar, and March 18th is our next committee meeting for this group. So being cognizant of Mayor Delane's March 15th target, will be a few days behind that, but hopefully that's still in the ballpark.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Thank you.
So now Erin gets to change hats and talk about the legislature and how well coordinated they are.
They're meeting, so that's a win, I guess. As you all probably have heard me say before, because this is not my first time in front of you, the legislature is meeting right now. This is their short session, which means they put 6 months of work into 6 weeks or 5 weeks, depending upon how you math. So we're in week 2 and deadlines are already crushing us as lobbyists moving forward. There are 2 big themes, one of which is more WCCC adjacent in the work that you do, but obviously how we deal with the substance use disorder crisis that is facing all of us as local governments and as a state and as a nation is a huge topic of conversation. I'm not going to get into that here because that's A, not my area of expertise, despite how much I talk about it, and B, not really the focus of WCCC. The big things that are happening that relate to the land use and transportation and regional coordination that we try to see at this table is is around housing. There are a couple of major bills that every day has a certain number of pages that changes and a certain number of requirements that it places on local government for our planning processes for housing development that also changes. House Bill 4063 is one of those omnibus bills that's being put forward by Representative Dexter, who is the chair of the House Housing Committee. And where that requires a conscientious conversation within Washington County is it includes a section related to housing production strategies, housing planning, housing needs analyses, and housing expectations from the state, and where that happens and who is in charge of it in the urban unincorporated areas within the 3 metro counties. There was a work group over the course of the interim between last session and this session, where we had technical experts from counties and cities at the table to have a discussion about adding counties in the urban unincorporated areas in metro to the list of people who have housing expectations placed on them by the state, but then have to do housing production strategies to figure out how we are going to accomplish meeting those goals, given that, well, we actually do develop housing at the county, but that's, not actually development. in the same way. But so there has been a compromise agreement there. The question becomes now, can we afford to do it as a county, just like the rest of you as cities? No, we can't. We can't afford to do new things. We're too busy trying to afford to do old things that keep changing every elected cycle of a year. So it's been a super fun conversation for us. Part of what we did work to uphold in those conversations are our ongoing ability as local governments to decide amongst ourselves through the urban planning agreements, or whatever you call them, or other counties call them other things, so we didn't name them specifically. But making sure that where there really needs to be a keen eye towards how annexation might occur, or how you want, neighboring properties to look as they develop, making sure that there's the ability to do that coordination upon agreement between the local governments, not by fiat of any one local government making a decision for other local governments on how things work. That is the essence of local control, and we are supportive of each other in those efforts. So that has been worked out. It is in the bill. There's some small minor technical tweaks that are happening in there, just to make sure that we have also called for clear coordination with our urban service providers as we do all of that, including water, sewer, those types of things. So the other things that are included in this bill right now literally have escaped my brain, because it got real technical real fast, and a bunch of surveyors tried to inform me about stuff, and I lost my mind and decided I don't understand partitioning anymore, and I'm tired. But there is a workload that is coming within that related to partitioning and repartitioning when it comes to middle housing, which has been a complicated and highly technical conversation that I have just avowed myself of trying to fully track. I think what is fair to say is that the surveyors who've participated in that, which is really important for the local government functions of understanding where meets and bounds of properties are and who can do what on those properties, has reached a technically feasible resolution at this point, is maybe the best way I can put it. There are a bunch of other pieces of the bill that are not related to the work that we do as local governments, but those were the two main pieces that really caught my eye. There are other parts that overlap with requirements that are included in the governor's bill, which is the other really long technical bill that's going to make some substantive policy changes. I know that the cities have been well represented by the League of Oregon Cities in this conversation, and we have been well represented by the Association of Oregon Counties in this conversation. So my traditional too far in the weeds takeaways are probably not here in this conversation for once. But there are some really profound changes, I would say, that are being accomplished in the governor's bill. Some that are more impactful to cities than they are to the county, but one that's impactful to all of us is the creation of a new state office, which is jointly created. And I don't know exactly how their financial relationship works, but it's called the HAPO, the Housing Accountability and Production Office. So this creates a new entity that can have oversight about how we implement state laws and our own planning when it comes to residential building, both between the land use and planning side that DLCD will bring to the table for this office, and the Consumer and Business Services Department, i.e. the Building Codes Department with this division within DCBS, are joining to create the rules and oversight and thought processes around this HAPO. And really it's there to do a few things. One is create and support some model coding and model building codes, model planning codes, something that might actually be assistive in the technical assistance world. Number two is for purposes of consultation. Again, more of that technical assistance, which a city can ask for, or an applicant who is trying to develop housing can ask for. But the third and the most troubling and nerve-wracking of all of them is the amount of oversight and the ability to question and investigate our choices on how we have interpreted our plans, building codes, all of those things, and ask for either court orders or appeals to DLCD to enter into orders against us for failing to meet the requirements of housing needs. So this is another body with not direct authority, but authority to investigate and make decisions about whether or not we should be brought up on charges is not the way they would like us to put it. But essentially it's an oversight body that is going to be able to refer us into judicial proceedings or somewhat more litigated proceedings based on concerns of applicants, specifically when it's related to a single development or people in the jurisdiction, which I have yet to get good definition of, because if I'm standing there when I make my complaint, does that count? Or do I have to be a property owner or a voter, you know, whatever. Anyway, when we're making those bigger, more legislative planning decisions. So those are the people who can bring us into that. And then the HAPO can mediate it or can make recommendations that we be brought into a more conflict-oriented outcome. So I saw some hands go up really fast, so I'm just going to take hands as we go. Mayor Fender.
Thanks, Erin. I just want to throw a reminder out there about what's happening in King City. And Mayor Lube and Mary Beatty and I, along with Mayor Buck and Mayor Callaway, went on behalf of MMC last week to discuss Measure 110 and the housing package. And I just think it's really imperative that King City is a great beacon of terror along these discussions, because what we're seeing in King City, right, my entire council but for 2 members are under recall specifically because of a vote for our master plan, right? We have this immense pressure from the state, Metro, the county to build. We're doing what we are legally required and requested of us to do, and we're facing a huge recall. The consequence of which is quite dire to the city, in my opinion, and also quite dire to our expansion efforts, right? And 10 years of planning, millions of dollars in grant funding, and possible a huge amount of units that are desperately needed in our metro region could go all to the side and just disappear, right? So I think it's really important that, right, cities, we want to partner with with everyone, right? We are doing all the things that are being asked of us. And there's yet this one more component, right? I'm sure Mayor Linehan can jump in, but you know, her city's at the precipice of this and is being almost about to be blocked, right? We're at the end and it's almost about to be undone if tomorrow night goes the way they want it to. And so I think some thoughtful conversation really needs to be happening around some of these extreme precedences that are being set. And in my opinion, not enough people are paying attention to what's happening in King City because traditionally recalls aren't very successful. But those estimations, you know, it remains to be seen if that's going to work here, because there's a lot of other factors that we can talk offline about why the vote might go a different way, right? So anyway, I just throw that out there because I think that's a really important point that I don't hear a lot of conversation about.
Mayor Rosner.
Yeah, thanks, Erin, for the update. Appreciate it. I'm just curious, you know, a part of the conversation we've been having with Matt in the governor's office, and I think a lot of other cities are having this conversation, is about the lack of infrastructure to support housing. And I know in the governor's bill, I can't remember, the HB 3518, whatever it is, LC 19. I'll start with that. How's that?
Senate Bill 1537.
Senate Bill 15. Yes, thank you. There is money in there for infrastructure, for grants and forgivable loans if it's attached to affordable housing. The challenge is it's only for the project area. They did introduce some language that allows for loans to build what I call the middle mile infrastructure. Like, how do I get the trunk line to the project area? So, you know, we have significant parts of our Brookman expansion area and frankly Sherwood West that are going to need that middle mile water and sewer infrastructure before anyone can build out there. And you know, a loan is great, but if I had a durable source of revenue right now to pay back a loan, I could go out and bond against that today. So that doesn't really help me, right? So I'm just curious where the county's at. And are you guys also having conversation about the importance of infrastructure dollars so we can really open up these lands for housing development? It's going to be a big issue for Sherwood West, and it's already been an issue for the Brookman area, which came in 08, you know, and probably 70% of that's still sitting undeveloped, and mainly because of lack of infrastructure.
Yeah, so I started interrupting myself with taking questions. So this is a perfect transition to the next part of 1537 is that there is significant amount of money that's called for in the bill. What that total amount of money looks like is a big question mark, I think. There's also a side effort that has been driven by LOC conversations about like what's ready in the near term for these development dollars. And that list is being created and sitting in a separate bill. And this all comes down to a Ways and Means conversation, which is happening behind closed doors because that's where Ways and Means decisions should be made. Sarcasm figure. But I think that, so the county has definitely recognized that infrastructure is one of the biggest and most expensive barriers to housing development, and that includes all levels of infrastructure. We have not engaged as directly in the water and sewer conversation because that is not ours as much. It can't get built without it. We also work with Clean Water Services pretty closely because, you know, shared board, shared life. But we have been supportive of investments in infrastructure because it's key, and placing all of the onus on local governments to pay for that infrastructure has never proven to be successful. We have also, as the board has adopted its housing framework, and part of that is resources for infrastructure coming from other levels of government besides local. And the other piece of that is, of course, protecting those sources of income that we have for the capacity building work that we need to do related to our infrastructure as things urbanize, i.e. system development charges, and our TDT here in Washington County is key to making sure that we can do those middle mile capacity building projects. And that's the revenue sources that we traditionally bond against. And low interest loan from the state might be more affordable than our bonding processes, but who knows? It's also a matter of what revenues are they willing to put forward, and it's never enough at the end of statement because it can never be. So we do talk about it when we have these conversations about the only way expansions can be effective, even infill can be effective, is if the infrastructure dollars are there. And don't have to be borne on the backs of a Measure 5 and 50 restricted general fund. And that the state used to participate and the feds used to participate, and they need to come back to the table and start putting these monies in if they want to see any housing production, which is going to be a key component to other pieces of things that we're making investment in with our industrial lands and our economic development. You know, it's great if we can build new fancy jobs, but if people can't live places near their jobs, how are we going to function? So it's a totality of the circumstances means infrastructure dollars are incredibly necessary across all levels of infrastructure, from like, you know, the pump station or the main facility into the pipes into the reach the units themselves. All of those pieces need to be accounted for in this process. But we are not, as a county, the loudest voice in that conversation because we have to be aware of who needs that funding to accomplish those things. And so trying not to get too far over our ski tips in the infrastructure package, which is me hedging a lot, but we are always there with you as local government partners and making sure that it's affordable to build out, not just to us, but to people who are subsequent purchasers or renters of those units.
Yeah, I super appreciate that. You know, and one of the reasons I bring it, well, two reasons I bring it up, you know, is one is there's some longer term investments, and I'm specifically thinking in our case of the Brookman trunk line extension that will open up, you know, potential for 2,000 to 3,000 housing units all said and done when you start looking at Sherwood West too. That's huge, right? And I'm bringing it up here because it's a CWS project too, where Sherwood and CWS are splitting the cost. I think our side's $4 million, and don't quote me, CWS is like $7 or $8 million. So working together on some of those specific projects might be worthwhile too, in terms of getting it in front of Ways and Means and how important it is.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor Dolan.
I'm listening to what Tim's saying, and I'm thinking the question is around, are we opening up the gates enough? I think you spoke about that there's money suggested for affordable housing. Is there money for middle housing? Because my problem would be, I don't know how we, with clear conscience, ask the state or the county to fund market rate housing infrastructure upgrades, because that should be the responsibility of the builder, unless we're going to get some kind of consideration on that to keep housing affordable, right? Do you see the difference there, Tim, what I'm asking, right? Because
yeah, absolutely. And just to speak to that real quick, I agree with you within the project areas, but when you're talking about getting the sewer line, 5 miles from point A to point B before you can even start talking about what's affordable and what's market rate, that's what I'm talking about, that middle mile. But
I think where I get off the bus is if it's market, because I think about the $1 million lift station that had to go into our 123 acres for a couple thousand houses in Cornelius was born wholly by the market rate developer, right? They paid to have it designed, the county approved it, Clean Water Service approved it, but there was no give back to our community because they bore the whole deal of it. If we'd asked to bring county, state, or federal monies to the table, then I would have been asking for some kind of affordability consideration in it. But that was pumping it all the way. It's not 5 miles. It's from the end of the development all the way back up to the highway to get to the sewer line. So a mile, but 3/4 maybe. But I think that's where we get a look. And I think the right answer to me, talking middle housing and below, I'm good. But when we get to market rate, that's where I think the discussion to me changes channels.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that, and maybe I'm not saying it very well, but if you have right now, probably the direction we're going to go is Sherwood West is master planning it, mainly because of HB 2001 and making sure that we have all those different housing types in there. Because our problem is the developers will just come in and put single family detached in through the whole thing, unless we have a paradigm to drive that. But since that middle mile is completely outside of that, it doesn't qualify for any of those funding mechanisms. So that's kind of where I'm going with that. But I do agree with you in terms of prioritizing that.
Yeah, so I will say that the conversation around the infrastructure piece has been ever evolving, and I need to go back and reread the -4s, but there has been some definition of what site related is that might include some of this. But again, it is tied to that low to moderate income service provision for those particular programs. But just to get through the rest of the bill, given that it's 148 and you've already delayed enough on my behalf, I think one of the other really big components for cities to be aware of is the technical issues around mandatory adjustments and variances that are being placed on city shoulders. So I would say your planning staff is probably well aware of this, but you should be planning to show that you've already done your work and you very much give these as necessary, so you're not subject to the requirements of the state. But I will leave it to you guys to advocate for yourselves. But there are cross-jurisdictional issues when it comes to whose variances are you granting. So we're mindful of that. We're watching that as well. Right now, it's not in the unincorporated areas. It's not even in the UGBs that's going to be required. It's all inside of your jurisdictional boundaries as cities, but that doesn't mean they aren't our codes or another local jurisdictions, local government's codes of service district. So it gets very complicated very fast. And then the really big thing, I think, even to Mayor Fender's point here is UGB expansions have been proven to be very, very hard to accomplish. Probably easiest, weirdly, in the metro region, but still not simple and still not without political consequence. But this bill is trying to set up a process by which they can be done relatively quickly, even faster than our fast route, which has never been taken because it turns out it's not fast enough in that. Anyway, I'm just still bitter from 2013. Don't mind me. So this expedited UGB expansion for purposes of housing has some conversations around, some of it has to be preserved for low-income housing, affordable housing, so capital A affordable housing, which is deed restricted, but then all types of other housing can be brought in. It's at agreement with the city and the landowners, realistically. In the metro area, there is still a metro process that's included in that. At the end of the day, the county's role in UGB expansion is preserved. And then the final piece to all of that is making sure that there is continued conversation between service providers to make sure that serviceability happens and that everybody came to the table and said, this is how we're going to accomplish the next steps in building out that urban infrastructure to serve this new area at the edge of the UGB that's being added in. Inside Metro, it's still got to be inside the urban reserves. Outside of Metro, there's 4 types of non-resource lands that are available for this. There are limits on the number of acres you can ask for. I haven't read the most recent version of it, but it's, you know, it's a step at trying to create greenfield availability, but it's still not simple, and it does not solve for the political problems that either of our local jurisdictions who have done expansions recently have faced in the face of people who would like to see everything develop inside the current UGBs. And I have no opinions as to any of that, I'm sure. So that's like a really another big piece. This has been an ongoing back and forth. I think conversations are still continuing. And a large part of what local governments are looking for now in order to be satisfied and moving forward is the right amount of funding that reaches the need and clarity about what our roles and responsibilities are, and just stop trying to hold us accountable to new rules every year. That'd be really neat. I'd really support that as a thing. There are other pieces to this housing cycle and housing conversation that are taking place. There's an interesting bill where the state will backfill us if we opt into their program for SDCs, if we delay collection of them further down the road past certificate of occupancy. And then the state will pay us our SDCs and they'll go after the people who have refused to pay. I have questions about, you know, subsequent land purchasers and liens on property, but that's, you know, not actually my job. But so there are people trying to find creative ways to help offset the cost of housing directly, but not, sometimes they don't want to put the onus on our backs as local governments, but not always. So those are some of the big things. And then I'll just close out with some of the economic development work that's going on. Regionally significant industrial sites program was accidentally sunsetted last year by a failure to get it through the end of the process. It got left out of bills it should have been included in related to semiconductors. So we are working to get that back on the books, which is really important when you want to talk about infrastructure capacity building to our industrial lands, but also making more industrial lands really available to become shovel ready, which was a main topic of conversation in the last session. So we're working with our local government partners. Metro has been a really big, strong partner in this program in the past, as well as the Port Portland, but it's really important for cities and counties as well. And it's not just reopening the program, but also funding it and making some technical changes to make sure we can use it. All of those things are occurring right now, but it's never simple and it's never fast. And then there's a bunch of other creative ideas, and I have no idea how much room for creativity is left in this session, but there is a lot of work going on right now. And we are trying to keep track of it all, but with 280 bills, it still feels like thousands of bills worth of ideas. So session has to end by March 10th by the Oregon Constitution. That's the 35th day. So they must go sine die by then. They are getting through bills this week. So we'll have a killing of bills celebration later on. Oh, I forgot one bill that I feel like Scott Winkles from LOC makes me talk about, but it is a transportation related bill to some degree. It's the recreational immunity issue around trails. There is an amendment to just a shell of a bill that is moving forward this afternoon, I believe. They're going to have the hearing on it, but it's a temporary fix for local governments in keeping trails not subject to whatever I felt like I was doing on the trail is what means I was doing on the trail. So there is that bill. It is a peacemaking moment. It does have a requirement for local governments to enact something if it gets passed, and then we have about 1.5 years in order to get a finalized process around recreational immunity through a work group this summer, is what I've learned literally as I was having these conversations on the side. And then, you know, there's always the bill to extend the West service down to Salem, which I would love, because if I didn't have to drive 217, that'd be great, and I could get some work done on the train. But again, that's been a bill that's come back perennially. I'll let TriMet figure that one out for us. With that, thank you for your time. Happy to answer questions. Always appreciate how engaged you all are in this process, and that we work together as counties and cities to see work get done effectively.
Thank you, Erin. You do amazing work. Appreciate it.
Any questions for Erin? Councilor Rosenthal.
Yeah, quick question. Has the League of Oregon Cities taken a position on the bill to defer systems development charge fees to put them into a holding tank, so to speak, so that they don't come into the loan process? Has the LOC taken a position on that?
I can't speak to LOC's positions on that bill. I could go back and check through the record and get that information back to you, but I don't know if any of the mayors here are aware of that.
Yeah, if any of the mayors want to weigh in, that would be helpful too.
I'm
I
trying to
remember them talking about it. Mayor Coward, you on the Friday call?
You know,
Representative Gamba told me how, you know, it's Gamba's bill. So go ahead, Steve.
you know, I don't recall I don't recall if they have taken a specific position on it. I'll be glad to find out, Councilor Commissioner, and let you know.
Yeah, the last LOC Executive Legislative Committee meeting I was in, it was brought up, and Gamba was looking for a position. There was some skepticism in the room, but I don't think we took an official one yet.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Erin? All right. So thanks for coming, Erin. Appreciate it. I think that's about it for today. We covered the agenda. We already did our updates. Anything else for the good of the order so we can get out a whopping 3 minutes early?
I have one item that should take less than a minute, so we can still be 2 minutes early.
All right.
I just want everybody to know that I think some of you already know this, but Kim Young was elected as our council president moving forward. So we'll be doing a resolution. So she'll be my new alternate for this meeting. I think some of you already know Kim. She's amazing. Very happy to have her as a partner. Keith had only planned to do the council president thing for a year. So as he put it the other day, he goes, "Now I'm just a counselor." He kind of said with a roll of his eyes. But his job, or not his job, his company's really taking off, so he needs the extra time. But Kim's amazing. She'll do a great job. I think some of you already sit in some committees with her. And but I just want to make sure you guys are aware of that, and you'll be seeing Kim occasionally here.
All right. Thanks, Tim. Anything else?
This is Steven. I just wanted to remind everyone, next month we'll have our MSTIP project prioritization discussion coming back to you all. So wanted to prep for that. And then as we discussed earlier, we'll be bringing back some additional discussion around the JPACT trip.
All right. Anything else?